Some of the most dangerous exploration of the Earth has occurred in the frozen depths of the Arctic. Expeditions have set out to explore this frozen wilderness, but not all of them have returned. One of the most famous voyages set out in 1845. This expedition had one goal in mind: to discover a sea route through the Arctic. During this journey, both ships disappeared. Countless search parties have been sent out in hopes of finding these lost ships, with only rumors of starvation, hypothermia, and cannibalism coming back. This has only made the search far more compelling, and it has since become one of the greatest mysteries of its era, now going by the name of Franklin's Lost Expedition. For centuries, European explorers sought after a trade route to Asia through means of sailing through the Canadian Arctic. This route was called the Northwest Passage. In the 1800s, the British Royal Navy was making a push to map this elusive passage. After decades of expeditions, the possible route was narrowed down to an area of about 70,000 square miles. They commissioned one last mission to map this area that consisted of two ships, the Erebus and the Terror. At the command of these ships was Sir John Franklin. With a crew of over 120 men, the ships were equipped with 3 years' worth of provisions and set off towards the Arctic in the spring of 1845. Within a few months, they had reached the western coast of Greenland to stock up on supplies and began biding their time in favor of better sailing conditions. However, after a brief encounter with a few whaling vessels at the end of July of the same year, they were never seen or heard from again. That is, by Europeans. Over the next 150 years, the missing story of Franklin's Lost Expedition was pieced together by the expeditions that sought after them and the testimonies from the native Inuit people of the Arctic. 2 years had passed since anyone had heard from Franklin and his men. Franklin's wife Jane campaigned for the Admiralty to send a search party out to be sent to find her lost husband. The British Royal Navy set a reward for anyone that aided in the search for Franklin and sent out 3 search parties, 2 by sea and 1 by land. Despite this initial effort, all 3 came back with nothing. With this news, the search for Franklin shifted into the public's eye, and the mystery of Franklin's Lost Expedition began. With the search for Franklin now turning into a full crusade, several more ships joined the hunt. By 1850, the first relics of the expedition had been found. On the coast of Beechey Island, the remains of a camp were found, and here lied the graves of 3 members of Franklin's party. This news was disturbing to the people of England. An expedition as well stocked and prepared as Franklin's should not have been losing men this early into their journey. But this was only just beginning. 4 years later, a man named John Ray finds another clue to the crew's fate. This time from the Inuit near Pelly Bay. Ray was told of a party of white men that were spotted near the mouth of the Back River. Upon getting closer to the party, they realized that all of the men were dead. After further inspection of the remains, they had also found that these men had resorted to cannibalism. As grim as this news was, the testimonies from the Inuit people only described this group consisting of around 30 men. So where was the rest of the crew? Lady Franklin commissioned one last search, this time commanded by Francis McClintock. The aim of this expedition was to search King William Island, just north of the Back River, for any clues regarding this mystery. They split up into separate search parties and spread out throughout the island. On the western side, they made their first discovery, a lifeboat containing a large quantity of relics belonging to Franklin's expedition. Also on board were 2 skeletons. The parties continued their search, and upon reaching the north side of the island, they made the most important finding in the search for Franklin: a stone cairn. Beneath this rock structure was a note left by crew members of Franklin's expedition. This note had 2 messages written on it, both being written at separate dates. The initial note states that they had wintered at Beechy Island for the winter of 1846, and that all was well with the expedition. The second message is where the true fate of Franklin's expedition is revealed. They wrote that the Terror and the Erebus had become trapped in ice just off the coast of King William Island, and as a result, the ships had to be abandoned. Scrawled beneath this was the deaths of 24 members of the crew who had died by the spring of 1847, including that of Franklin himself. The question at this point, what has caused all these men to die? We know that this expedition had enough supplies to last for 3 years. Yet 3 men had passed on Beechy Island just 1 year into the expedition, with Franklin and the other 20 men perishing within 2 years of the expedition. Something was killing off these men. Returning back to the note left on King William Island, at the end of the second note, the remaining men wrote out where they were going next. They were to set out south in hopes of crossing the sea ice that would bridge King William Island with the river just south of their location. This river was of course the Back River, where the Inuit people had spoken of finding the group of starved men. With these findings, Franklin and his men were deemed deceased, and the search by the British Royal Navy and Lady Franklin had ended. Inspired by the mystery of Franklin's lost expedition, an American named Charles Francis Hall's curiosity for this case began. He believed in the possibility that there were survivors of the expedition who had been living amongst the Inuit. Hall gained passage on a whaling ship and set out on his search for Franklin. During this time, Hall had lived with the Inuit people and gathered hundreds of testimonies of encounters they had had with white men in the area. Within these accounts were 2 instances where Inuit people had seen crew members of the lost expedition. The first time was during their trek south of King William Island. The Inuit came in contact with the crew as they struggled across the sea ice, but the Inuits knew they did not have enough supplies to help these men, so the 2 groups parted ways. The second account from the Inuit told of a group of men from Franklin's expedition who had survived past 1848. These last remaining men attempted to sail the Erebus down the coast of King William Island. During this attempt, the ice had overwhelmed the ship, causing it to fall over onto its side. This fall created a hole in the bottom of the ship in the process, causing it to sink into the ocean. If we are to believe this account to be accurate, by navigating this final leg of the journey, the crew managed something they could have never have imagined. They had finished their goal of sailing through the Northwest Passage. In the decades since Franklin's disappearance, many modern expeditions have gone out searching for answers. The most important discoveries made by these searches were that of grave sites belonging to members of the crew. Bone samples of the perished crew were analyzed and found to have large quantities of lead within them. There's a lot of speculation on how these men could have ingested so much lead, ranging from the tin food they were eating to the distilled water system they had been using on their ships. The important part of this, though, is the effects that lead poisoning would have had on these men. The effects of pneumonia, scurvy, and tuberculosis would have been heightened, all of which was common amongst the bodies that were found. By now you may be wondering, where are the Terror and the Erebus? After years of searching, both ships were eventually discovered, but this wasn't until quite recently. An Inuit man named Louis Komakuk grew up listening to the stories that were passed down amongst his people for generations. Over time, he started to realize that the stories he had heard had many similarities to aspects of Franklin's lost expedition. He cross-referenced these Inuit accounts with the decades of findings by explorers searching for Franklin. Using this information, he was able to generate an idea of where the 2 ships might lie. With Komakuk's findings, a Canadian search team was able to discover the location of the Erebus in 2014. They found the ship 11 meters deep within Wilmot and Crampton Bay, just south of King William Island. The Terror was discovered not far from the Erebus in 2016, within Terror Bay. Both ships are still being searched to this day. But this begs the question, where is Franklin himself? We know he died on board the ship due to the note left on King William Island. However, there was no information about what was done with the body. They could have kept Franklin's corpse on board, or buried him somewhere nearby. Kumukok had a theory as to where Franklin could have been buried. Inuit accounts told of a tomb made of liquid stone that was seen on King William Island. This liquid stone they referred to was likely a rudimentary form of cement, used to preserve Franklin's body. Unfortunately, Kumukok passed away before setting a search into motion, so the truth of Franklin's location won't be found until further searches of both the ships and King William Island are made. In the meantime, we can explore a more theatrical take on where Franklin lies. There are stories told by the Inuit that date back to shortly after the two boats were abandoned. They say that a group of the Inuits walked across the sea ice that had trapped the ships in their path. Upon reaching one of the ships, the group climbed aboard. Inside the ship, they found a man, presumably dead, seated in the back of a dark room, with only a grin on his face.